Howdy folks, Max Caveman here, bringing you back to my journey to the Pokemon 2024 World Championships for the Pokemon trading card game. Today I will be discussing the events for February 2024, of which I went to 5 events in total, 3 challenges, 2 cups. There was one challenge that I did have to sadly miss, but things happen and you can't attend all of them. So let's get right into it. First one was a challenge on the 11th of February. We did 5 rounds and there was 22 players. So starting off with, in round 1, I had a tie against an Arceus Water build. This is a deck that basically revolves around any water Vs. So it was running Gyarados V, Kyogre V, Greninja V, but basically the idea is to just power up the water Pokemon with the Arceus V-Star and swing in. Ultimately, I did go to time and went 1-1 against this opponent. However, there was a little issue with this game, which I'm still a bit disappointed that nothing happened to the overall score for that game. After round 1, my opponent ended up having to be deck checked because they found an inconsistency with his deck list. Turns out he was running a 63 card deck, so he ultimately was running a legal deck. Nothing ended up happening with our score. His round 2 opponent did get a benefit, but I didn't get anything for my game against him because it was found after the fact. With that in my mind, I went into round 2 and I lost 0-2 against Chien Baxcalibur. Now, I think I was a bit salty at this point, knowing that the guy I played was sitting right next to me, across the table next to me, in this round, and knowing that his deck wasn't legal did throw me off a little bit. I ultimately did try and focus on my game, but sadly, my opponent is one of the more, I do want to say a bit more competent than most, but she is a very good player, so I ended up going 0-2. So that did suck a bit. Round 3 was against a Miraidon Ilecki player. So using the Regieleki to power up the basic Pokemon on the field, I end up going 2-0 for a win. Definitely a bit easier when you're dealing with Miraidon hands. You do have to worry about that. The Iron Hands coming up and taking that extra prize. Sadly, for my opponent, I was able to deal with the Regielekis quite easily because I do run, well, in my Golden Gold list deck that I have been playing for a while now, I do run a Vitality Band, so I was able to hit the 310 for the Regieleki knockout with 6 energies instead of having to use 7, so it was a bit easier for me. Round 4, this is an interesting one. Now, I don't want to be naming names here. If someone who knows me personally from tournaments, they will probably be able to figure out who I'm talking about. But there is a player, my round 4 player opponent, has had issues being of cheating. So most of the players that knew that I was facing off against him did warn me to make sure to call a judge over if something happens, and that has affected me facing off against this player, where in my mind, I'm too hyper focused on what they are doing. Um, and during this whole month, I did face him a couple times. He's using the same deck, um, and it does throw me off because when I find out my parents, I do get told call a judge over if he is cheating, and it does get to me in that matchup. But he was using a Lost Tina deck. I ended up going 0-2. Um, Ultimately, that did come down to the mental effects of knowing what my opponent has done in the past and being warned to hyper focus on what he's doing, and then Path of Peak comes out. That is a card that hard shuts down my deck, and yeah, it just ultimately ended up with me not being able to focus well enough on being able to actually out the path and out what was currently on the field. Um, After that, we go into round 5, and I was facing off against a Chen Baxcalibur. So it's the Chen Pao Baxcalibur deck. I end up with a tie of 1-1 at time. Who was my opponent here? I think this was an interesting one. I was kind of pushing for the tie, ultimately to hope to do a bit better, but that's a 1-2-2 record. I wasn't placing very high. One round 5 opponent, I've played against him numerous times, so it's fine. We knew either which way it's going. It just comes down to obviously draws how things happen. Ultimately, I placed 16th out of 22 players there, so a bit of a low end for that event. So moving on to a challenge. This is the 13th of February. This is best of 1 here. 5 rounds, 27 players. So all of these events, we are getting top 8 points available. So that is good. So starting off the night, I faced off against a Serena EX deck. For those that haven't fought this deck before, it comes down to putting enough damage onto, or using one of attacks of Serena that puts 30 up to, until there is 30 HP left on a Pokemon, and then you lock it out with a Vanillux, which Pokemon under 40 HP can't attack. So basically, your idea is to put a whole bunch of damage all around the place, and then deny your opponent an attack. And then there is a way to do a 12 prize knockout. Try 12 prize card taken from knockouts with a Hisuian Braviary. Ultimately, I did come up with a win. It did help that the Serena was weak to Steel, so I was attacking for weakness, and then having the Vitality Band did help out. I did have some Taro scenarios, shenanigans going around there, so that was quite interesting. Round 2, I was facing off against an Arc Gigas deck. So this is a Arceus with Regigigas, and I believe there was Slacking V in it. So just basically attaching a whole bunch of different types of energies to all your Pokemon, and they are big, beefy Vs, so it is a lot of energy to knock out these guys. Ultimately, I did lose that match, sadly, but my opponent was sort of trying to find a different deck, and ultimately that did work for him that night, so that was good. Round 3 is a Rapid Strike Urshifu Inteleon. This is an annoying deck for me, mainly because if it gets any of these bench snipers super early and I haven't got a Manaphy out, or Just it attacks big and fast, and um, it has been super consistent for a long time now. So ultimately, I did lose, which I wasn't too fast. In my mind, I knew that I could come back and get top 8 points at this point. So I was just focusing on what my next opponent would do, um, and I knew that I wouldn't have to worry about Rapid Strike and Talion in Urshifu for very long. So next up was round 4. I was facing Gardevoir. Now I can't remember what variant of Gardevoir this is. I just wrote Gardevoir in my notes. It's been a while since I did this match, but ultimately I did lose. Um, Gardevoir is a hyper consistent deck. Um, it does lose some consistency soon with the Brainwave um, Gardevoir, so it is just, it's not something that I'm disappointed with. I know the Gardevoir matchup pretty well, and it's just wasn't my night for it. So yeah, that was a loss. Round 5 was against a Shenpao Baxcalibur. I know this matchup pretty well by now. Um, Mainly just lose to bricks, which I believe I did end up losing this game. So that really sucked. So ultimately, I went 1-4 for this event and placed 23rd. That it stung a lot. I thought I was getting better, but at this event, I was just like, nah, I could easily do better. I knew I could do better, and I was just disappointed in myself. Um, Next up is a cup. This is from the 17th of February. We had 23 players here. So we end up with 5 rounds and then top cut if we make it. Round 1 was I faced off against a Miraidon Hands player. So Miraidon EX with Iron Hands EX. My opponent was just getting back into Pokemon. They said so right from the get go, and I knew from watching them come in earlier in the day that they were borrowing the deck, so they didn't know the lines very well. Had a bit of a bad way to win a game. Game 1, my opponent went to use Electric Generator and accidentally, they lifted up their whole deck to, they accidentally turned it up slightly because they had been throughout the day picking up their deck and then counting the 5 off for Electric Generator. Sadly, a judge was standing right behind them as they turned it upwards, even though they didn't get a good look at anything in the deck, just the bottom card. That was a double prize penalty, and it was a loss at that point. So I end up winning game 1, and then I end up going to tie in game 2. So I end up winning the whole set because I won game 1. My opponent was a little salty because double prize penalties is a very harsh penalty, even if you don't get any real information. But because it was a cup, harsh penalties needed to be given out when necessary. So it was a bit of a disappointment that happened, but I ended up with the win for round 1. Round 2 was faced off against Darkseid. Darkseid's an interesting matchup for me. I know what I should be doing. Now, in my list, I do run a TM Devolution. So I was using that to attempt to mess around the mapping that my opponent had. Sadly, it didn't work. I ended up going 0-2. But knowing when to use TM Devolution versus something else, it is just a bit annoying. There are a couple cards that I wanted to have in the deck that I didn't at the time, that I might put back in the future, but very much at the time I didn't have just like a little bit of a stall card just to buy myself one more turn, which is kind of what I needed. Moving on to round 3, after that loss against the Dark Side, I faced off against another Dark deck, this time Rory Moon. Well, I say Rory Moon. It was more Peko beat down at this point. So, obviously, playing with Gholdengo, a lot of the basics that aren't rulebox have 70 HP and less. So the Morpeko just simply got the energy and swung repeatedly, knocking out everything. And then when I did get a bigger, beefier guy on the field, such as the Palkia V-Star or the Gholdengo EX, the Roaring Moon came out and just dealt with it. It's fine. It is one of the matchups that I don't know the best. Because up until this point, I've rarely faced off against the Roaring Moon, so it was a bit difficult. I was like going, oh, that's the way I should have pathed it, but ultimately end up going 0-2. I did learn a bit, so that was good. Round 4, we are facing off against Origin Form Dialga V-Star. This is a deck that I love facing off against. I faced off against this opponent multiple times throughout the season. Dialga V-Star does have the ability to get an extra turn, which can be a big difference, and swing games quite easily. Being able to get that that Chrono Star to get that extra turn. Ultimately, I did go 2-1 and secured the victory. Ultimately, being able to take I believe I took a 4 prize turn. Being able to take out multiple Dialgas, that really helped. I believe I used TM Devolution at one stage to get the knockout, but I can attack with Greninja, Radiant Greninja, so I can deal with those a bit easier. So ultimately, I did win that round. Final round was against another Dark Side deck. Having lost early in the day, I just sort of knew some of the lines a bit easier for Dark Side. One of the things that I did do earlier in the round 2 was I did mess up a cancelling clone because I didn't know how it worked properly. It was the first time playing it on that day, but I knew what to do for cancelling clone in this round, so I ended up doing the cancelling clone, take the benched Charizard, Charmanders or Charmeleons, because my opponent did run Charmeleon that day. So that was just sort of an easy way to deal with it. Game 2, I end up doing a double devolution. I run 1 in the deck. I end up getting Silene hit and then put the TM Devolution on the top of the deck and then draw it with my effects. So being able to de-evolve 2 turns in a row means I'm burning double candies, or all the extra rare candies and stuff. End up winning the game, but I shouldn't have. So I've known this my opponent for that round for a bit, and sent me a message saying that I shouldn't have been able to de-evolve his Charmeleon. We both missed it on the day. That's a big point. because it was a more recent addition to his Dark Side list, so he didn't know it. It's the Flame Veil Charmeleon. I believe it's Flame Veil. Um, but basically, it shouldn't have been affected by the TM devolution, so it should have stayed on the field, so then he could evolve it into a Dark Zard the following turn. And he just didn't, because it shouldn't have gone the way it should have. But we both realized, and everything was okay with it. So end up going 2-0 there. So after the round of Swiss, I end up placing 8th. And that means I made top cuts, which blew me away. So being 3-2, I was worried it was going to be a bubble. So just worrying about percentages to get me into the top 8. But it was a hard cut at 3-2. No one else had the 9 points. There was one other player at 8 points, and if I had of, we had a tied, or then they would have been in. If I lost, my round 5 opponent should have been in the final, in the top cut. So ultimately, I was ecstatic. I had been set a goal by one of my mates from Cards to get points before Perth. We've got the Perth Regional Championships coming up soon, which is my local regionals, and with this, I achieved it. So I was quite thrilled with that. After round 5, I was one of the last, if not the last table going, so they did try and get us turnover very quickly. I had to submit my deck for a deck check. Everyone that made top cut did. Only thing to note was just that I might need some. I will be getting new sleeves soon, but they were just like, it's a bit iffy on the sleeves, but they're just general wear and tear. Warped. I didn't really get a break. I just had a chance to smash a muesli bar. So the others, they got a little bit of a break to get some food. So I was a bit exhausted, being able to get the break during the day. Round 1 top cut, I ended up facing off against my round 2 opponent, and I was dreading this because I knew what they were playing. They were doing Dark Side. Being in top cut was a different experience. During the first 5 rounds of Swiss, it is noisy as hell. Everyone's going off it, like talking, and it's just insane with the level of noise. As soon as top cut started, the noise disappeared. Everyone was hyper focused on the games. It did help, and it didn't, because conversations that people were having just sort of came into focus a bit more, which was a little bit distracting. But I learned from my mistakes after round 2, and ended up getting a Canceling Cologne off, taking out the Manaphy and a Charmander, or I can't remember if it was a Charmander or a Pidgey, but whatever it needed to be. I got the round 1 win, but went to time in the end, and with extended clock for the top cut, it did mess with me a little bit. I did end up winning this. I ended up going 2-1, but I could have won a bit easier. I thought I needed more energy. I took out their Dark Sides, and they were swinging in with with the Radiant Charizard. So I ended up picking up that win. Just being able to get the energies back, which was the best thing about the deck. It's just been hyper consistent on getting those energies. So with that, I do make top 4. So we go on to round 2 of Swiss of Top Cut, and I'm facing them against a Peony Miraidon build. So this is Miraidon hands, but it's mainly focusing on Peony. So I think there was a couple of games in the past that I was facing off against a Peony build, but this is very consistent. My opponent has been playing Pokemon for a long time, so they know what they're doing. It's just what took basically we had one sound victory apiece going into game 3. That's where things got a bit interesting because we were bricking hard, and it was just sort of who can unbrick faster. Because the ultimate downside of the Peony build is the fact that you discard your entire hand to get electric generators, and if you don't get the energies off the electric generators, then you have to draw into your next out or your next big like hand refresher. So I did slow down the gameplay, just not being able to get to those cards. Ultimately, I did lose, and I was eliminated from Top Cut at top 4, which did give me 32 points, championship points. So that was a big confidence booster. Then we come back 2 days later to the exact same store on the 19th of February. We had 5 rounds best of 1, which is okay. I do get why we do best of 1 versus best of 3 at certain events, but yeah, definitely would have preferred best of 3. So round 1, facing off against Miraidon hands. I do end up coming up with a win. In honesty, I started to feel burnout from all these events being so close together. I can't remember what was going on in that match. So yeah, I end up winning that game. Going on to round 2, I end up facing against a Darksard. Now Darksard, it can go either way for me. Best of 1 sort of forces me into focusing on the lines a bit more. So devolution, deny, everything, and then that was just it. Just came out ahead, denying rare candies, just shut them down. Round 3 was against a Miraidon hands. I ended up losing this game. Like I said earlier, I can't remember much of this tournament. Definitely, yeah, just definitely exhausted. So end up just can't remember much, but yeah, end up with a loss. Round 4. Now I do remember this one because I did nearly come out with a win on this, or even a tie. I think I might have nearly tied here. I was facing off against Darksard. Now, my opponent was trying a new deck. They're trying Darksard. They had been playing Golden Go as well as I have. And then just trying a few new decks. I ended up... It's a bit interesting because I knew what the deck could do, so I was just trying to deny certain things a bit too much. And obviously I couldn't do everything, but I was strategically doing damage to not take knockouts until I could guarantee certain ones, which nearly brought us to a tie. I did get a knockout that threw off the pricing for a Radiant Charizard, and if my opponent didn't have an energy in hand, were going to have they were going to swing with the Radiant Charizard full game. I forced them to have another energy. They had it, sadly, so they end up walking away with the win. Round 5 was against Gardevoir Screamtail, a deck that I am a bit annoyed with. Gardevoir Screamtail does require me to manipulate damage quite consistently. Ultimately, I did lose. At this point, it's just a bit of annoyance with the deck, so yeah. I ended up placing 9th out of 17th. So this would have been best of 4. Interesting thing about this tournament is the top table ID'd immediately. So the guy that thought he was going to win the tournament actually didn't win. So that was a bit of a funny thing. He thought he could ID for guaranteed first place. Sadly, he was mistaken. But it is what it is. So moving on to the end of the week now, we have a cup on the 25th of February. We have 6 rounds because we have 33 players, and my God, was this a long day. Even without Top Cut, not including Top Cut, it's a long day. But yeah, it's just insane. Starting off with round 1, I was facing off against Chien Pao Baxcalibur. I ended up going 1-2 and lost. I can't remember much at this point. I've been doing too many Temporal Forces pre-releases to think about beforehand, but I believe we were very close to going to time when Game 3 was determined, so it was just down to the wire for either a tie or a win out of it. Sadly, I did end up with the loss, which it's okay. Round 2, I was facing off against a Miraidon Hands. Miraidon Hands it's an interesting deck because I know what to do with it. So I believe my opponent failed the electric generators. So I ended up with the win there because they just couldn't get the energies to the hands to start swinging, which was great. So I went 2-0 there. Round 3 was against another Miraidon Hands player. I believe they just got the electric generators off a lot faster, so they ended up with the win, going 1-2, sadly. But yeah, very close, I'm pretty sure. A lot of the 1-2s or 2-1s usually go very close to time, so I'm pretty sure that was very close. But going on to round 4. Now, very early in this video, I did discuss the player that has a history of cheating. This was him, come back for round 4 again, actually. Facing round 4 on the 11th. Again, this affected me. I know it does, and people have brought it up to the TOs and all judges that might be at the event that you need to watch this guy. I end up going 0-2 against Lost Tina. It is, and let me be clear, if you're facing off against someone that is notorious for cheating at your event, make sure the judges know who they are. Because people want to play the games properly, and if there is someone like this that people are warning people about to be careful, it throws people off and it makes people not want to be there or not even be in that game. They just want to scoop and not deal with any kind of mess around, and that's how I felt. So dealing with hyper focusing on him and Path to Peak, just sort of went, yeah, nah, I'm done. I don't want to be playing. I nearly dropped from the tournament because, in all honesty, it was just feels so incredibly bad to be facing off against someone consistently that you have to be so hyper focused on. Um, but I stayed. I do have the thing that I do want to. I don't want to ever drop from a tournament unless something happens that forces me to leave. So I did play it out, the rest of the event out. Going on to round 5, I was facing off against the Arceus water build from the first event, which is interesting. Um, the deck is actually legal this time, so that was good. Yeah, this player is new back to the game. They did take a little bit of a break, but the deck, the Arceus water build, is interesting to say the least. Ultimately, I did get a 2-0 victory. Being able to get more out fast enough and then dealing with energy was just a lot easier. Going on to round 6. So it's up against another Lost Tina deck. There was slight issues with this round that my opponent was having. And it wasn't with the gameplay itself. It was people that should be in Top Cut. That their record was too good. That if they lost, they should have still been in Top Cut. The TO hadn't called the start of the round yet, and we were trying to work out why everyone was set up, and it turns out they were trying to a couple of players were trying to determine if it was okay to just ID and then have a lunch break for the round 6. And it did annoy my opponent quite a bit. It was annoying me too, because you shouldn't be discussing doing an intentional draw right next to the judge while holding up the tournament, because the judge needs you to go sit down before they can call start round. So we were a bit on edge. Ended up getting the first game. Just my opponent was still a bit on edge and not focusing enough. I did lose ultimately, going 1-2. Path to Peak is key for the Lost Tina deck, and it just as soon as it came out, I do have 6 out in the deck, so I should have been able to remove it. Sadly, I would remove it, and then it would immediately come back down, and then I just needed to dig deeper in my deck, but Path to Peak denied me that. So ultimately, I lost, and I went 26th out of 33 players. And that was it for the month of February. It was a beast of a month, even though it's the shortest month of the year, but those 5 events, obviously I did miss one, so I would have been going to 6 events. Yeah, just it took it out of me a bit. So much so that I did miss one of the events for March coming up, because I'm recording this mid-March. We're about to hit the I'm about to do the March events over the next couple of weeks. But ultimately, I did walk away with 32 championship points. So ultimately, I do need 268 points left to get to the World Championships. At this point, that's a long shot. Not to say it is impossible. I do need to get high placement at the remaining cups. We do have 4 cups remaining in the season, because there are 4 stores. And then ultimately, and after those 4 league cups, we do have the Perth Regional Championships, which is coming up in a couple of weeks, which will be Temporal Forces. We'll be using Temporal Forces, so I have to do the post-rotation deck building soon, so it is going to be interesting. But that being said, this is quite a long video at this point, so I will say I hope you enjoy this video. Hopefully I get to see you again next time, but until then, have a good one, folks. See ya.